Step one in tape and texture is called pre-fill. Pre-fill means getting mud back into any joints that are just a little too deep or a little too wide. In a butt joint like this, they have V'd out or created space for the pre-fill, much like you would bevel two pieces of steel that you were going to butt weld. You want penetration of the mud. And on any big holes that got damaged when the sheet was being put up, you use a hot mud, which gets hard in a hurry and makes a solid back that won't shrink anymore when you come over the top with your next pass. Taping and texturing drywall is a lot like finishing concrete. You're always trying to head off or prevent or control cracking, while step by step bringing the finished surface up to the degree of flatness and smoothness that the job requires. In this case, we're trying to bring this up to a condition where it's ready to receive an orange peel sprayed on texture. Now, total transparency here, I am way worse than just lousy at this part of construction. And I had to ask Darren and Jim to both coach an old carpenter on the ins and outs of taping and texturing. On top of that, we have a lot of different stuff going on in these film clips. So I hope that what I'm describing here makes some sense as I try to show you and explain to you the sequence of events that Darren uses. So the big picture here is that these guys are making these walls smooth. The lows are filled, the highs are feathered. All of the trowel lines have to be wiped out either with the trowel or later with sandpaper so that at the end of the day there's a perfectly smooth, flat substrate everywhere. These guys have been so patient with our camera work. I mean, they've just been a pleasure to work with. So we're just going to try to stay out of their way here today. They're all over the place. They work here, it gets dry, they work there. We don't want to trip them up. They've got a job to do, and we need to help that process if we can. After pre-fill, it's time to tape. Now the tape is actually just paper. There's no adhesive on it. Watch Darren using this bazooka. This thing is a tricky tool to get the hang of, but boy does it save time, as you can see. It's applying a layer of mud behind the tape in order to stick it to the wall. The tape is similar to the type of paper that's covering the drywall itself, and it resists cracking between the separate sheets. It's providing the tensile strength across the joints. It is super important that the mud is uniformly spread behind the tape so the tape is uniformly glued to the drywall. If you miss a spot, it's going to eventually blister or raise up after the next coats are put on. For all the joints that are on an angle, that are not just flat, like where the vaulted ceiling meets a wall, there's a special type of tape called Ultrafex that has a built-in crease, and it will fold to any angle in order to make the corners nice and straight. All of the specialized tools that you see Darren using throughout this process are designed to help him cut out time, help him get the job done faster. Now, he could do all of this work with just some mud in a pan and with a knife, but it would take a lot longer. For big jobs like this, you got to have the right tools if you're ever going to get it done. One of the big reasons you just can't rush drywall taping and texturing is because it's got to dry out in between the coats and the steps. This can be a challenge in the wintertime for sure. Quick and thorough drying is not just so that the work can move forward, so that the next steps can be done, but also because the mud itself will sort of ferment or sour and begin to smell bad if it remains wet for too long on the wall without thoroughly drying between coats. So since it's winter around here, we've got a few electric heaters and a kerosene heater that we're using to get the temperatures up a bit at least. Now, if you don't have heat in the house, even just putting a few fans throughout your project can help the mud to dry out by moving the air around. For drywall installers, this makes it super important to get their steps correct. If they forget something and need to go back to a previous step, it's going to basically add a whole extra day in order for what they repaired to dry out. So following the steps and being detail-oriented is important in order to get the job done in a timely fashion. Now, you might be remembering that I mentioned the hot mud, that it does get hard quickly, but that's more for repairs and special scenarios and small fixes like pre-fill, and not for the actual finishing of big expanses of wall or ceiling. With the walls and ceilings first coat taped, it's time to roll out all the angles. This means that all the 90-degree interior corners get a piece of Ultrafex plastic corner with paper glued on just like the tape on the butts and flats. Now yes, the outside metal corner bead goes up on all the outside corners. And in this house we're using square corners instead of bullnose. Plenty of folks nail up the corners with the hanging, but Darren feels like it saves some trouble to put it up after the first taping is all done. Also, the more fasteners that you put in this stuff, the stronger and more ding resistant the corner's going to be. So Darren uses a pneumatic stapler and shoots it on 3 to 4 inches on center. Like I always say, anything worth doing is worth overdoing. Next, it's time for the double, or the second coat of mud on all the joints. The first change in that process is that now it's topping mud, or all-purpose mud, and not taping mud. This is a smoother and, more importantly, a sandable mix. The other difference is in the application process itself. This time the mud is put into a 10-inch skim box for the flats, and it's run right down the middle of the joint. The mud's put into an 8-inch skim box for the butts, and 3 passes are used, 1 on each side and 1 down the middle. The nails and screws are all spotted again, and now the house is doubled. The project is starting to get close to done now. A third pass, called a flush coat, is applied with a 12-inch skim box on the flats and a 10-inch box on the butts.
Then I go to Georgia, and all the finishers put the bead on it. So none of the hangers did put the bead on it. I was like,
as I watch Darren do the final passes with these skim boxes and the wide knives and the sanding pole, I'm struck by how unique this job is in the world of construction. More than in any other craft, we're watching him combine movement, attention to minute detail, hand-eye coordination, balance, and strength. Now, there are lots of other places and situations in the world of building when these same skill sets are on display. But not all of them, and not all at the same time, and not to the same degree that must be used in doing this job. So if everything that happened before has been done carefully, this final stage of touch-up is minimal. You're just walking through the house with a knife and a pan of mud, looking for low spots or, a little piece that got missed, or just the little extra bits of work that are going to mean a lot when this thing's done. Once you've got it all touched up and it's dry, it's followed by a very light sanding with a 220 grit sandpaper. And the sanding is done on the mud portions only and not on the paper itself. The cleanup and masking that's done prior to the pre-prime is the final step, but an important one before spraying everything with the pre-prime, which coats the entire job with a primed surface, very uniform, very smooth, which will absorb all the following coats of primer and paint evenly, creating a nice uniform sheen, even on the long flat ceilings and the tall walls. It was good to have Jim back on the job to handle the texturing. And I've just got to point out that Jim doesn't go anywhere without his dog. And she's a good dog. In this case, in our house, we're going with an orange peel texture. There are a lot of different decorative ways to handle the final application of mud or plaster, and each of them has its own fan base and its own region where it's popular and its different times in the trending spotlight. However, every one of the other methods is more labor intense and more expensive than this texture, and Jim's a master at it. The key seems to be having the mud at the right consistency, somehow keeping track of where you have been and the overlap of your passes, and how to approach a room in order to not paint yourself into a corner. I don't know how he does it, but after everything is dry and you can walk through the house examining all the surfaces up close, in all the years that I have used Jim, it's a rare thing to find the smallest inconsistency. Just a little more construction magic, I guess. The drywall's done. It feels great, it looks great. 13,000 square feet, and Darren did a great job. Now, you saw him spraying the pre-prime onto this wall, the walls and the ceiling in this house. That's really an important step that sometimes can be overlooked if somebody assumes that the painter is going to take care of all the primer. This kind of points to the reason that in many places, painting and drywall are handled by the same companies because they're so closely related. Painting and drywall, drywall and painting, each depends on the other. And so the communication, in this case, between Jim Allen Drywall and Four Seasons Painting about who is handling what part of the process is key to getting a good job. So the next step is painting the walls and ceilings. I hope you're enjoying this process of watching this house gradually become more like a home. And as always, thank you for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.